Hello, hello. What's going on, everybody, in Facebook and in YouTube land? My name is Jesse. You are all on my Painting with Jesse pages and channel on Facebook and YouTube. Just want to say hello and welcome to everybody. Let's see. Yeah, guys, I'm on. Let me see. No, guys, I'm I'm seeing some of the comments in the comment section. Of course, it's probably going to take a little moment before everybody realizes that I'm actually on. I would like to get a mic check. If you guys would please let me know that we're good, that you guys can hear me. That'd be fantastic. What's happening, Gloria? What's going on? What's going on? Can somebody give me a mic check? Let me know that you can hear me okay. All right. We hear and see you. Fantastic. I know seems like some of you might have been panicking a little bit, thinking you had the wrong time. I know I usually start my broadcasts earlier. My streams start about 10 minutes early sometimes. Just had a few little prep things I had to get done before we got going today. So there's already some spammers in the comments section. Just make sure you guys ignore those. Do not click on those links. Okay. Again, there are spammers on here. Do not click on the links that you see in the comments section. What's happening, Buffy and Junior Bennett or JR Bennett and Marie Cabana? What's happening all the way in Blainville, Quebec? So obviously today we're going to be going over brushes, how to use them, when to use them, and things like that. So hopefully you are all excited. Lots of you have been asking about this for quite some time. So this is it. A couple of things that I would like to mention first off before we get started, and we are going to get started pretty quickly. There is no exact set way to use brushes. Regardless of what you hear from me today, this is the best case for how I use my brushes. I've been painting for about 15 years, and I have found, brushes are specifically made for certain types of painting, brush strokes, things like that. If you're using the right type of brush, your paintings are a lot easier to create. Okay, so that's what this tutorial is about today, to talk about that. However, I want to make sure that everyone understands that you can use brushes. Let's say you can use 3 or 4 different brushes for the same thing. You can interchange brushes. What I show you today will likely work for the vast majority of you, but some of you may prefer to use different techniques, different brushes for particular purposes, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going. But I've got a brand new set of brushes that I'm going to be using today. I've used this set in the past, but this is primarily what I'm going to be using with my painting session today. I'll be showing you using this set. I put a link for this in the description of one of my posts earlier in the month. So I think some of you guys probably ended up ordering this. But there are a bunch of different kinds of brushes that you can use today. I'm going to be using synthetic bristle brushes. Okay. Somebody asked me in the comments section a few days ago, why are you using synthetic bristle brushes? There are a varying quality of brushes out there. Synthetic brushes, even though lots of artists, professional artists, oftentimes prefer more natural hair like sable bristles for their brushes. Today, lots and lots of really good brand synthetic bristle brushes are out there that come really close to producing the same type of finish as a natural hair bristle brush. So synthetic bristle brushes are a little more durable in my opinion. I do use natural hair bristle brushes for some of my commission pieces when I do portraits and things like that. For some parts of those, when I'm using acrylic paint, I will use some natural hair brushes. But for the most part, the vast majority of all my paintings are done with synthetic bristle brushes, higher quality synthetic bristle brushes, kind of like some of the ones I'll show you today. I'll show you some examples. So obviously, the higher the quality, the more expensive they are. In the links I did, in the comments, in the description of the video, I did put some links in. A few people asked me to put in some links or suggest some higher quality brushes, and there are some in the descriptions to this video. Uh, I will post, after this is all over, I'll post some information on my page for those of you that are interested in getting some higher quality synthetic bristle brushes. But again, synthetic bristle brushes I found to be a little bit more durable. They're as long as you're getting the higher quality ones, they're really, really nice. So that's why we're doing synthetic bristle brush, using a synthetic bristle brush for today's tutorial. But yes, maybe in the future we'll go a little bit more over some of those professional quality brushes. But again, the differences have become very minimal. So, but anyhow, let's talk about some brushes really quickly. Just kind of, I'm going to show you here on the main screen. Give me a second while I bring this up. So we got hog's hair bristle brushes. We got synthetic bristle brushes. Right, this is a synthetic bristle brush right here. Golden Taklon. This is a large wash brush, basically used to cover really large areas of paintings. This is a 2-inch brush. Okay, I'm not going to be demonstrating much with this one today. Just want to show you guys the difference between some of the brushes. There's that. We have another brush here. This is more of a hog's hair brush. Low quality, nothing fancy about it. These bristles tend to be a lot stiffer, coarser. You're going to produce lines in your brush strokes, generally speaking. Okay, again, a lot stiffer. This is a lower quality brush. This isn't anything fancy. And then you've got some higher end brushes like this one here. What you want to look for in your brushes, and again, I'll be going over this as we go through the brushes individually, is that your brushes snap back into place pretty easily. When you do this, they snap back into place. They're springy almost. Okay, and then of course you've got a variation of stiffness within your brushes. Now this is a really nice quality brush. I use sometimes. This is an Artist's Loft Vienna angle brush with a really nice synthetic bristles on it. This brush alone probably cost me about $10, $12, somewhere in there. Okay, so you can imagine if you're buying a whole set of these, it does get costly. But again, very nice. The brushes spring back into place very nicely. Okay, and then I have another brush that's nice quality from Artist Loft, a Ferrule brush. Same thing, very nice and springy. This is meant to mimic more of the hog's hair, the high quality hog's hair brushes. Okay, very tight, very clean, interwoven bristles. Okay, but again, those are higher quality. This one also cost me, just for this brush alone, I think it might have been like 13 bucks. So again, once you start kind of getting into these higher quality brushes, the expense does go up. This is what you call a long handle brush. Okay, long handle brushes, as you can see here. This is probably about 12 inches in length. These are really nice for when you're standing up at an easel painting from a distance. You can kind of sit there and do this from a few feet away from your easel, so you're not super tight and up close. Okay, these aren't so useful when you're painting on a table. You can still use these for when you're on table, but they're not quite as comfortable to use. This is more of a medium to short handle brush. Okay, really, really nice for painting on a table. Of course, you can also use this when you're up close on an easel. Okay, so you have those things to consider: length of the handle, type of bristle, etc. The brushes that I generally use are these softer bristles. Okay, that like this, the one that I showed you on this one right here. These are the ones that I generally use for the vast majority of my paintings. Okay, and this is what we're going to be going over mostly today. So that being said, let's take a look at the time here. We are at 4:11. I imagine we're probably going to be going through this for at least an hour and 30 minutes is probably more like it, but at least an hour, maybe a little bit longer. Okay, I will be answering questions throughout the process. I'm going to get right into it with my brushes. Actually, a couple of things. One thing that you guys usually notice me doing with my brushes during our sessions is that I have a water cup like this with the brushes sitting inside of it. Okay, this is over a long period of time. This can damage your brushes. Okay, this can, even though they're in water, right? I do this to preserve, to keep the paint from drying out. Why am I zoomed in so much? Give me a second, folks. Let me make an adjustment here to my screen. It looks like I'm zoomed in a little more than I expected to be. Hold on one sec. There we go. All right. So anyway, during my painting sessions, especially my live sessions, this is what I typically do. I have a water cup. My brushes sit right inside of it. This is to preserve, again, keep the brushes from drying out. You do not want any acrylic paint to dry on your brushes. Oil paint is the same thing. You don't want oil paint drying on your brushes. But with acrylic paint, what we tend to do during in between steps is we keep the brushes inside of some water. Over time, keeping the brushes with the weight of the handle down, right, on the bristles will slowly deform your brushes. What I tend to do with my nicer brushes is I do something more like this. I'll grab some kind of tray, some kind of bin where I can lay them. There's water in here, and I lay them on their side or at an angle sideways. This keeps the weight of the handle mostly away from the tip of the bristles. And from time to time, I can turn them over. I can just kind of do this, right? After a while, I can just kind of flip it over. This tends to preserve my brushes much more. They last longer, especially with my nice brushes. This is what I like to do, okay? So this is what I would recommend, even if you've got a set that you're not necessarily, that you didn't pay a whole lot of money for, but this is a way to preserve your brushes. When I do it this way, with the water cup, there's a little water cup holder here in my table. It's just more convenient, but this is the safer way to do it, okay? So let's look at our brushes really quickly. Again, I want to show you all the set that I'm using today. This is by Conda. A real basic, decent set of synthetic bristle brushes. This is what you call white Taclon, okay? They're obviously, you know, kind of a nylon or poly. I think it's more like polyester, but they're nice quality brushes, good for the job that I've used them in the past, and they've lasted me quite a long time. And there's a really nice variation in this set. If you don't have this or any brushes yet, this is a good starter kit, a really good starter kit to get in with. They will last you a long time, and they will do the job. Anyway, there is a link in the description of this video. If you guys are interested in checking those out, it'll take you right to the Amazon page where you guys can get them. But again, that's just an option. And it is primarily what I'm going to be talking about, using with for today's session. What's happening, Anna Herrera and Carrie Anderson from Minnesota? Let's see. Pamela Jones. So the staining, the color of the bristles isn't super important. The white bristles it's going to be a lot more apparent. They will take some of the pigment. They will absorb some of the pigment and change colors over time. Okay, by the time I'm done today, some of these bristles are going to be a little different in color. That's pretty normal. The golden Taclon just tend to be a little bit nicer from what I've seen. Now this is a really nice brush, so I wouldn't compare it with this, but these brushes over here are comparable to these right here, something like this golden Taclon. These tend to be a little bit stiffer. From what I've seen in a general sense, these tend to be a little bit stiffer. Okay, slightly different bristle type, but it is really similar. There isn't a whole lot of difference between this, let's say, and this. Okay, but yeah, these will definitely absorb some of that pigment. These do too, a little tiny bit, but the white ones will absorb the pigment quite a bit more. But anyhow, I'm going to run down the brushes that we're going to be using with today. I'm going to be practicing showing you technique here on my paper pad. I do recommend that you practice along with me, whatever it is that you see me doing up here. As I go through each brush, maybe practice on your own. I do want to remind everyone that this video will be available immediately after the live session's over. Both on Facebook and on YouTube, you could simply go over to the live tab up on top on Facebook, and you'll see this recording there. YouTube, of course, you just jump onto the page, and you'll see the video up towards the top. First brush I want to talk about. This is a flat, what you call is generally considered a wash brush. Okay, these are used. They hold a lot of paint. Okay, these are used to cover large areas of your canvas, paper, etc. Okay, these are good for that. Long brush strokes. Now, I don't normally do lines with these, but you can also do long lines, right? If you're, let's say, especially if you're making something a little larger, a tree, a branch, etc., you can use something like this for that. Okay, the way you would use this, and I think I had said I wasn't going to practice with this brush, but what the heck, why not? Just going to show you an example of how this would work. I'm going to take some basic blue paint, phthalo blue, and you could do it one of a couple of ways. So you've got paint. This is a really nice flowing paint from the Fine Touch, smooth, tends to be kind of liquidy like this is. So with a paint like this, you don't have to add too much water, if any at all. What you would do with this is you would do these long brush strokes, okay, where you cover again lots of area. Now, typically, oh, and I said I was going to use my new one, but I ended up grabbing this one instead. Must be something subliminal. I didn't want to use that. Use my big white one. Anyway, so you use this to cover large areas like your backgrounds, right? Sky, if you have large areas of ground to cover, you would use this. Now you could, oftentimes what you'll see some artists do is they'll do this. They'll grab their paintbrush, they'll dip it right into their water cup like this, and then they'll bring that water and just grab paint like this, and then start doing this. When you have especially thick paint, full body paint, thick body paint, that's a really good technique to use. Other times, and I prefer this, I'll dip my brush into my water, I'll bring it over to my paint, and then I'll blend the two together. This blending creates a really even blend, okay? And it just gives me better control of my paint. If I simply take my brush, dip into the water, and come over and just kind of quickly do this, there are going to be some areas of the paint that are thicker, some that are thinner, and so I have a little less control of how that paint slides onto the canvas, okay? So that's one way to use these large brushes. Like I mentioned, I don't normally do things like lines with this, but you could press your brush down against the plate, okay? And you could do something like this. Long lines, right? The thinner you can get this, especially if your brush tends to be on the stiffer side, you can do these long, thin lines like that, okay? Branches, you can do a little bit of drawing with this, right? There's lots of little things you can do with this. Like I said earlier, you can interchange. Some of these brushes are interchangeable as far as what their utility is. You can do a crosshatch pattern like this. You can paint upwards. But generally speaking, these large flat brushes are used for your background, large areas of canvas, okay? So that's what these are for. We're going to talk about some of the flatter brushes here in a little bit, smaller, give you more control, but that's your general flat brush, okay? Anytime you're done using a brush, and I know most of you probably already know this, I just stick my brushes in a water cup. Again, this is a basic brush. It's not too fancy. There's nothing crazy about it. It doesn't really matter. I've got a whole bunch of these in my studio. But again, for those of you that really want to preserve your brushes, you want to lay them down in water like this at an angle on their side, okay? Preserves the, even like this, I won't see much effect on them until after a long time of use. You know, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 uses, they'll start to maybe change shape a little bit, but this isn't ideal for preserving your brushes, okay? So that's a main flat brush. Then of course we got smaller brushes. This is just another narrower, smaller brush. It's used for the same thing. This is a 1 inch wide. Now this is the body of the brush. This is what's considered the body. Okay, of course this is the tip of it, top part. This is what you call the ferrule. One thing that you want to do anytime you grab paint with your brushes, you want to keep the paint away from the edge of your ferrule. Whatever brush you're using, when you scoop up paint, when you come over and grab a whole bunch of paint. You want to load it, but you don't want it. You don't want that paint to go inside of your ferrule. That is one way to ruin your brushes over time. If that paint goes inside there and dries, eventually it will start to create problems for you. It won't work as nicely as it does without any of that down in there. Paint goes down in there, that's hard to remove. So again, you want to load up your paint, but you want to keep that paint from touching the metal part there. Okay, so this brush here, it's just a smaller version of that big one that we just used. So that's how that works. Okay, want to make sure it works the same way as the other one. Now, some of these wash brushes are harder to make. Let's say I grabbed paint with this brush and I pressed it down against my canvas. This edge may not get thin enough. Okay, it might still stay kind of thick. So it's hard to make thin lines like this. Not all of these are exactly the same, but in general, this is still considered a flat wash brush. Okay, but all right, this goes back into my little fancy holder here, brush holder. We're just going to go down the row to the next brush in my group. And that is this large mop brush. Okay, now I've got two of these. Actually, I think I've got three of these mop brushes handy, but this is one of my favorite type of mop brushes to use. I actually just replaced my old one, and I know for those of you that have been painting with me for a while, you have not seen me use this brush. Okay, I've specifically stayed away from getting too fancy with my brushes on my sessions because I know most of the people that were joining in had basic brush sets. Okay, but it's a really thick. It's called a mop brush, right? And of course, it kind of looks like a mop. It's wide. Right now, it's wet, so it's a little bit clumped up, but it's kind of wide. It's kind of chubby. It's thick. Okay, this brush is used for a couple of things. You can use it to cover large areas of a canvas or your background, for example, like what I did earlier, showed earlier with the large wash brush. But another thing that you can do with these is you can do some nice blending. You can do clouds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my blue paint here. I'm going to go ahead and spread some on my canvas. And don't worry, folks, I don't mean to be moving too fast through here. We're going to take our time. I will be answering questions here in a little bit. Make sure you're writing down any questions you might have, okay? Because there is going to be times where I take some pauses in between and answer your questions. So here, I'm just taking my big wash brush. Okay, I'm going to grab a whole bunch of paint here. I'm just covering this up. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of things with that mop brush. One, I'm going to demonstrate how to blend with it. I'm also going to demonstrate how you can use it to create clouds, for example. Clouds I know are really tricky. All of these techniques that I'm going to show you, you can pretty much do with, for example, a round brush, a combination of a small round brush, and I'll show you what a round brush looks like in a little bit. Combination round brush and like a liner brush, the really skinny brushes, right? But it takes a lot more time to do this stuff. These specialized brushes are meant to facilitate those things, right? So you don't have to sit there spending a whole lot of time creating something like a cloud, for example. These larger brushes are meant to facilitate these steps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to take, let's see here, I'm going to take give me a sec. Let me grab, where'd you go? I'm going to take one of my 1-inch flat brushes, again, synthetic bristle brush, real similar to the large wash brush that I was using a moment ago. This is also considered a wash, flat wash, okay? So I'm going to take some pink. I'm going to add that pink down here at the bottom, and then we're going to do a little bit of blending between those two colors. Whoa, that's on really tight. So let's do it the easy way. Okay, so taking my 1-inch flat, right below that, I'm going to come in here. So I've got two areas of color that I want to blend. I've got some blue above, of course, and then the pink that I'm adding right now. And I want to create a nice blended edge between the two. I could continue using this brush, as I often show you how to do this with these brushes, and kind of come up and blend the two together, and that will create a blending. However, by using a mop brush, it is a little easier. I'm using my mop brush dry, just like it is. Well, it's got a little bit of water in it, like I said, but dry meaning there's no paint on it. What I'll do is right here on the edge, I'm just lightly, really, really lightly touching both areas of the paint, both the blue and the pink. And I can work my way up a little bit and then work my way down a little bit. What happens is that, one, the light touch that I'm using and the softness of these bristles is, as I'm doing this, it's picking up some paint from both areas. And as I move slightly up and down, it starts to blend those edges. Okay. Again, this is what you call a dry brush method. And you can use this with any brush, but the mop brush is really, really specially designed to do this kind of work. Really nice blending. Okay. Now the two areas, okay, you got the really dark area up above, you got the really pink area down below, and then in between you got a nice blended area. You could continue doing this as much as you'd like, as high as you'd like, right? Let's say you want an area with more blending in between. Just going to take my blue paint right here, is already dry, so let me add a little bit more blue there. Maybe we're gonna, whoops, I don't want to do that because I got a combination of both colors in there. And here we go. Now I can start working my blue downwards toward the pink. You notice that I haven't dipped my brush into the paint, right? Into my paint palette. I'm just using the paint that's on the canvas. And it doesn't really matter too much if you start from the pink and work your way up, or from the blue and work your way down. You can actually kind of go up and down between the two. But I'm barely touching that canvas when I do this. Okay, I'm barely touching it. The more I do it, the more blending happens in between the two areas. Okay. So that's another use for this, right? Again, you can use this to cover large areas of your canvas. But another thing you can do with this, so this brush, because I like it very much and I want to preserve it, I'm going to bring it over here and put it on its side while I'm not using it. It goes into my little bin here. Another thing you can do with this mop brush is you can create some nice clouds. So I'm going to take a little white, and I'm going to, oh, here we go. So we got some white right here. Okay, I'm just going to grab a bunch of this. I'm going to come up here, just kind of dab this paint around a little bit thick. I'm using my, let's see, 5/8 flat brush for this. Okay, 5/8 flat brush. Nothing that again, I'm not demonstrating the use with this just yet as far as the one that's in my paint kit. I'm just using this one really quickly to come in here and add some paint in here. And again, a little bit on the thick side. So there we go. Just kind of created a general shape of my cloud for my clouds. Now I'm going to take this one, put it back in my water cup. I'm going to grab my fancy mop brush here. And again, for those of you that are interested in this particular brush, there is a link in the description. But this is a really, really nice brush. What I'll do with this, again, using the dry method here, dry brush method, I'm going to come in here. Now what this does is it blends this white for my clouds, and again, I'm only using the very point of my bristles, into the background. Light touch. Okay, so as I do this, the white blends into that background. I lose a lot of that white. It becomes more of a light blue. Okay. And I'll do this all the way around. I can also change the shape of the clouds with this at this point. And you can already see, right, this is starting to look like a cloud. Okay, so now you're also getting a tutorial on how to create clouds, your basics. Back to my little 1-inch flat. I'm going to grab more white paint, okay? And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this again. Now in the front, I'm adding, this is a cloud that's kind of in the foreground. And basically what I'm doing here with my mop brush is I'm just blending the color into the background. And it creates this cloud effect. Okay, now I'm going to take this. Okay. Now I would let this dry for a little bit. Okay, I would let that dry a little bit. And I'd come back and do it again. Once this is all dry, the next layer of white that I put on top of it is going to stay really white as I blend it in. It's not going to get lost with the background like these layers did. But that's how you start to build a cloud. Now, I plan on doing a tutorial specifically on how to create clouds because this is not the only brush that you can create clouds with. Okay, there are other brushes that come in handy, but this one here, this mop brush, and again, they come in different sizes, right? Just like everything else. I have a smaller one in here, little smaller one in my set. Same thing. Okay, I would grab, once this is dry, now I can grab a little bit of paint, not a lot, just a touch, and I can come in here. And this will start to create a really nice white layer in the front of this. Now this is all still wet back here, so it's going to blend in with the background a little more than I want right now, but that's okay. What you'll see is you slowly start to create some really nice clouds using your mop brushes. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment here to answer some questions, see if anybody has any. And we are going to move on. We're going to continue. We're going to continue with all of the brushes in my kit. Again, I want to emphasize that brushes are interchangeable. There's not just one brush that you use to create clouds. There's not just one brush that you use to create flowers, for example, right? It's not that easy, unfortunately. I know some of you are going, no, but I want to know the exact brush that, that you have to use. That's not the way painting works. There are some, like I said, some general uses for brushes, and then they get a little specific. And there's all sorts of brushes. I'm not even covering, these are the main types of brushes most artists use on their paintings. The types, right? The flat, the round, the liner, and they do have different names for them as well. Okay, not everyone uses the exact same name for the brushes, but there are some basic types of brushes that most artists use to create almost any painting. There are some really special brushes that you can use out there, like chisel brushes. There's a type of paintbrush called a cat's tongue brush. That doesn't mean that there's an actual, they're using a cat's tongue in it, but it's shaped like a cat's tongue. They're really nice for making things like leaves, petals, and that sort of thing. You've got hair comb or comb brushes. They look like combs, right? And you use those to make things like grass blades and things of that nature. But anyway, the brushes that we're going over today are the basic types of brushes most paintings will use. Okay, so all right, let's take a look here. Let's look, see if anybody has any comments or questions. I don't see anything new here, but again, I do want to repeat that here in a little bit. Once this all dries, I'll come back to it and add a little bit more to it to make them look a little bit more like clouds. Okay, just to kind of give you an idea of how that would work. Okay, to kind of create a really nice billowy group of clouds in the sky. But anyhow, looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, and that is good. Fantastic. Oh, you know what I did not do? Did I not put in my Give me a second, folks. I want to get fancy over here. See if I can add my, there we go. That's what was missing. Hopefully it doesn't confuse you guys and make things a little too busy, but we'll see here in a bit. I just wanted to add my, the background that I prepared earlier. Part of the reason why I showed up a little bit late. Anyway, Carrie Anderson has a great question. Are the mop brush and the filbert different? Yes, there are some slight differences. The filbert and the mop both have the rounded edges over the top. But the mop brush has a wider, it's a wider brush all the way around. It's, in some cases, it almost looks like a round brush. The bigger you go, they tend to be a little bit more of a round brush. But there are some similarities when you're looking at a smaller mop brush and a filbert brush. And let me see if I can demonstrate here a little bit in a moment. But the filbert and the mop, depending on their sizes, can get really similar in look. So give me a sec. Let me show you guys up close on the camera over here. So here's a large mop. Okay, whoops, large mop right here on the right, and a large filbert on the left. The filbert is going to be skinnier. Sorry, I'm zoomed in, and I'm not used to being so zoomed in because I'm using a much smaller. My paper up here is a lot smaller than I'm used to with my large canvases. But anyway, here's the filbert, the top edge of the filbert. Okay, from the side they look really similar. Okay, but the mop is actually quite a bit wider. It's quite a bit wider all the way around, and the filbert is thinner. Now, these just happen with this particular set. They happen to look really similar, but there are a lot of variations in mop brushes. Now, the filberts tend to be pretty similar no matter what brand is making it. But mop brushes, a lot of them are really thick. Okay, generally that's the biggest thing you'll see. And the top part of the mop, it actually starts to look like a mop. Well, the bristles get splayed out. This is traditionally more of what a mop, most people would identify as a mop. Okay, thick at the base, thick all the way around. Even though it's a little wider this way than it is, this way, it's still a really thick brush. Okay, but great question. Great question, great question, great question. Hopefully all the brushes that you have, and I know over time as we use them, they tend to start losing, sometimes the writing gets lost, but they usually will explain to you, for example, this is a 1/2 inch bright brush. A bright brush is just a type of flat brush. Bright brushes tend to have shorter bristles, and I say tend because that's not always the case, but bright brushes tend to hold more water. They're a little thicker at the base. Flat brushes tend to be a little narrower. Okay, but they have really common usages. Okay, so we've gone over the mop brush. Okay, we've gone over of course, the large flat wash brush. What I want to talk about now is the filbert. Okay, and maybe we'll do it here on this background since I've already got a nice dark background there. But the filbert brush is one of my favorite brushes to work with. Okay, the filbert brush, what's cool about the filbert brush is it's got this nice rounded edge. Typically, when you load them with paint, you can flatten them really nicely by pressing them down against your palette, and you can make really nice thin lines with them. Now, the stiffer the bristles, I tend to like stiffer bristles. Okay, again, one way to kind of check is the snap back. If they're really flimsy or really loose, they're not really good. For most drawing with let's say you're making flowers and things like that, if they're really, really soft, and you'll learn this as you go, right? As you start to use them, the best thing you can do is to just go. A lot of times listening to somebody explain things, is nice because you get an idea, but you're not really going to learn what you like best because a lot of it is subjective, right? It's experiential. A lot of it you're not going to learn until you just start to do it. Okay, but when I describe this as stiff as opposed to really loose and flimsy, It's hard for you to know exactly what I'm talking about without experiencing it a bit. But basically, if they're really flimsy brushes, they tend to not be, you're not going to really enjoy painting with them. But anyway, these filberts, these rounded filberts are really, really nice. I like to use these for petals, flower petals, for painting on the inside of round surfaces. For example, I'm just going to draw a really quick circle on my, I'm using one of my round brushes. We'll talk about these in a bit. So let's say I have a nice, somebody's head. It's a circle, it's a sun, something round that I need to fill, whether I'm going to paint around the edge of it or fill it all in. These rounded brushes, these filbert, the filbert rounded head brushes are really nice to paint on the inside of. So for example, I'll load up my paint. It's easy for me to stay on the inside. Oh, let's say I drew something out. I've drawn out a character with a rounded head or a rounded body. I've got it all drawn out in chalk or in pencil, and I need to paint the inside of it. Maybe I'm outlining it. Maybe I'm simply filling out the entire thing, but I want to avoid, especially when it's something really round that has to stay round, I want to avoid making the mistake of painting past my edge. These filberts are really easy to do that with. Because of the rounded head, you're able to stay on the inside of your lines much easier. So again, let's say I'm just going to use my filbert to demonstrate. I've got a nice curved line that kind of does this. Whatever this is, I don't know yet. I'm just creating a kind of odd curved shape. You can also see that these filberts are good. If I take this filbert and I press it up against the canvas like this, I can make some nice thin lines with it. Again, like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of brushes that do some similar things. But so I'm going to paint on the inside of this, and I want to stay on the inside of my line. Because of the rounded shape of the filbert, I can hug the line really closely and stay on the inside of it and not have to struggle as much. Whereas if I use a flat brush with a really obvious edge, for example, like this, okay, like this little flat. Now this is a much smaller brush than this, obviously, but it's got a really sharp corner on it. If I use this to try to stay on the inside of my lines, I could very easily paint past my line. And again, on something round like a moon, a sun, etc., that can be difficult to fix. Or oftentimes what you'll see is when you paint beyond your line, people start trying to make a correction by adding more paint, making their sun bigger or their moon bigger. But if you've already traced it out with, let's say, something like the bottom of a, let's say I made a circle using the bottom of this. That's a really nice, perfect circle. It's a lot easier for me to stay on the inside of my lines using a filbert than if I'm using a really sharp edge brush. Okay, so that's one use of the filbert. Okay, again, staying really nice and tight. And of course, when you're doing that, you're painting with the rounded part of your brush. But another nice thing that you can do with these filberts is you can create some nice petals, leaves. Okay, I've got some pink here. Let me grab a little bit of water with my brush, just dipping that brush right into my water. Now, obviously, if I want smaller petals, smaller flowers, I would use a smaller filbert. Let me flip this over. But all right. And then let me get a little closer over here. So, for example, here's a nice little petal. Okay, here's another one. Okay, I can kind of work my way around by pressing down on the brush. Let me grab a little bit more paint. Of course, you can draw your petals with a smaller brush. Okay, but you can, using that rounded edge of your filbert, you can kind of all the way around. trying to do this without blocking your view, but I'm basically bringing that rounded edge of the filbert like this, nice and flat, and then I bring that in towards the center of my flower. Now I could also use the rounded edge of the filbert to do this. I can make my petals a little bit pointier. For those of you that have been painting for a little bit, or that have been painting with me for a little bit, you know, we always lay down a first layer of paint, right? We put down a layer of paint, and then we come back at sometimes 2, 3 layers over the top of them. Okay, and that starts to define whatever it is we're making. So right now I've laid down the first layer of paint, right? That's one style of flower. And then I would take another color, brown, black, yellow, or whatever, and using the same filbert brush, I can come in here and just kind of do that. Okay. Later, I can take one of my round brushes, my small liner round brushes, and add detail around the edges, refine the edges a little bit. But if you want to save on all that, maybe you're not looking for a super refined flower, you can do it like that. This is also good for making things like petals, not petals, but leaves. I'm using the edge of the brush now. Okay, I'm using the side of it. Okay, so here, for example, let's say my stem goes like this. Okay, and I'm just using the edge to make my petals, my leaves. Okay. Long lines. Okay. Stems, things of that nature, but different types of leaves. You control the pressure and the thickness of your stroke, of how much paint lands on your plate, on your canvas, on your paper, etc., by either lightly touching or you press down. Okay. But you can do some really neat things with a filbert. So again, you can turn it. Let me load up on some more paint over here. Paint's running a little dry. Let's see here. We'll go over here. So I start with the edge, come down, press down a little bit. Okay, and kind of do something like that. Got a long leaf right there. Okay. You can start with a circle right from scratch. You don't have to draw your circle out. Again, the filbert is one of my favorite brushes. Mainly, I like to use this to paint on the inside of faces, curved objects. Okay, really nice little circle that I was able to make there. If I used a square-headed brush, a circle is a lot more difficult to make. Again, because of the rounded bristles, the rounded edge on top, something like that is a lot easier to do. Okay, let me, a smaller filbert, and I'm trying to see if in my group here that I had a smaller filbert. Yeah, there we go. Again, my good brush goes back into my bin there. Okay, smaller filbert. This is about a number 8. Okay, now the numbers on these sometimes are in metric, right? When you see the number 8 10, 5, that's usually in millimeters is what they're referring to, and they're referring to the width of the base, the ferrule, okay? This right here. Sometimes you'll see them in inches, right, in the imperial system, quarter inch, half an inch, etc. And oftentimes kits will have a combination of the two. You'll see them both in some of the brushes in there will be in inches, and some will be they'll have a number on them. Now we'll talk. I know sometimes you see like a number over another, like a quarter inch or half an inch. Those are easy because they usually have the little inches mark next to them, the two little lines on the side, up on the top, right? Half, and then you got the 2 little inches. What are those called? I'm not sure. Commas, whatever the heck they are up on top. But on the smaller brushes, and we'll talk about this here in a little while, on the smaller brushes, sometimes you'll see a number with a slash line, a number like, let's say 5/0, 10/0, 8/0. Each 0, the number up on top, signifies the number of zeros that brush is. So a 0 is a very small brush. If you have a 5/0, that's 5 zeros. If you have an 8/0, that's 8 zeros. The bigger the number on top of the 0, over the 0, the smaller the brush. And again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I know it can be a little confusing, but anyhow, here we go. I've got my small filbert. Okay, I'm going to grab some more of my pink paint. Oh, I still have some on my other plate here. So here's some more of my pink paint. Just going to dip it right in. Bring a little over to the side here. Again, we don't want that paint to go touch the metal part. Again, the nicer your brushes, the more careful you want to be with them. So don't want any of that paint to get down in there. Just dip my brush into the water. My water's a little blue, so I'm bringing some of that water over. This pink that I'm using is a pretty thick bodied paint, so I want to add a little bit of water to it. Anytime you add water to your paint, it will make it flow a little bit better, easier to work with. But here we go, another flower. Okay, petals. Maybe these are a little tighter. Okay, you can do long petals, short petals. Okay, you can also do using the edge. Press down, pull away. Press down, pull away. Press down all the way around. Little flower petals. I'm using the edge of the brush now instead of using the broad side, so this gives me smaller petals. Okay, and you can work your way around and even overlap them if you need to. Again, I'm trying to do this without blocking you. Blocking your view. And for these more maybe simplified flowers, you could leave these as is, or you can come back with a smaller brush and add definition, outlines, things of that nature. Okay. Here's my little center. Still using my filbert. And again, folks, I want to remind everyone that this is not a comprehensive tutorial on brushwork. There are so many things that you can do. There are tons and tons of different types of brushes out there, as I've already mentioned. It would take probably a few days to cover every brush type and every single thing you can do with every brush. I'm giving you some of the basics. Okay. Some of you, maybe your favorite brush to use is a bright. Maybe it's a, you know, the flat, little short flat brush, or it's a round number 10. You know, that kind of, everybody's going to have a different preference. Brushes, just because you have a number 10 filbert and you in one brand, a number 10 filbert in a different brand, they may work a little bit differently. and they may be slightly different in size, even though they both have the same number. I've noticed that there isn't there is no exact like a standard that that everybody sticks to. It gives you a close to idea of what you're dealing with. But okay, let's talk about a round brush. So a round. Okay, here we go, a little round brush right here. Okay, this round brush is about a number 8. Doesn't have a number on it. It just says medium round. Could be about a number 8 brush. Okay, round. It's a rounded brush. Okay, it typically goes into a point. The good round brushes do. The cheaper brushes, round brushes, as you use them, they'll start to splay out, especially if you leave them in your water facing down for long periods of time. Okay, but these round brushes are good for lots of things. Okay, you can use these to make. Let's see. Let's use a different color now. Let me grab a little bit of yellow. You can use these to draw. You can use these to make fine lines. You can use these to make tree trunks and petals and lots of different things, because you can, by changing the pressure on the brush as you press down against your canvas, you can change the shape of what it is that you want to do with it. So one thing that I like to do with these round brushes is I'll spin them when I put them into my plate like this, and I pull away. As I pull the brush away from the plate, that makes the point nice and skinny. And of course, if I want a really small brush, really tiny thin line, I go for a smaller round brush. But this already, even though this is a larger round brush, I can already see that the tip is pretty small. I can use it to make nice, small, thin lines. That's a very tiny line I made there. I could use this for grass blades. Of course, it's a lot of work, right? If you're making lots of grass blades, I could use this to outline even. Okay, like let's say I've got a character that I drew, a person. I want to give it an outline. I could use this. I have to have some good control, right? Because if I accidentally press down, I can make a thicker line. But I can even do something like a branch. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some brown to demonstrate a branch. Because you can vary the thickness of the line with these round brushes. They're really nice to create things like branches. So for example, let's say you've got a tree trunk right here. You want to add a branch. You would press down on the brush, and as you work your way out, you slowly start to pull away and lift away from the canvas. And what that does is it starts to taper off the brush stroke into a nice point. So what you can do, again, we're gonna imagine we got a nice tree trunk right here. It's all filled in with paint. Okay. You can use these round brushes. Here's a nice little branch coming off of this tree. And still, even with this large of a round brush, by using just the point, I can make little tiny offshoots. Okay, little tiny ones. Okay. Got one up here. I'm using my hand here. I press it up against my pad, and I just lightly touch the tip of the brush to the canvas, to the paper, and I can make little tiny offshoots. Okay, so this is a brush that's really good for things like that. You can also make leaves and petals and the wings on a butterfly. Pretty versatile brush. Okay, but let's say as an example, just to kind of go back to the flower, another flower here, we got a little center right there. I grab some yellow. Just load up my brush. Okay. And what I'll do, I can start from the outside and work my way towards the center, kind of like that, all the way around. So I press down a little bit as I get closer to the center. As I increase that pressure, it widens, right? It widens down at the base. And so I'm able to create some little petals. Now I would ideally do this once that center is dry, because I don't want to accidentally pick up, as I did there, I picked up some brown. But I would wait till my center is dry, or I would do the petals first, and then I would do the center. But just for demonstration's sake, again, this is a round, and it's about a number 8, 6, somewhere in there. Okay. And again, I could just kind of go around and work my way around. So here's a sideways flower. Maybe a daisy that you're looking at from the side. Whoops, a little too much there, but I press this way. In this case, I'm working my way from the center, and I work my way out. As I get to the end of the petal, I pull the brush away so that it tapers tapers into a point. There we go. Now I can take, again, same brush. I don't have to go and switch to a different brush. Just grab a little bit of brown and come in here. Okay, flower that's you could see from the side. I could also take this round brush. There's a lot of versatility with these round brushes. I can grab some green. Now this is a little trickier when you're doing long lines, because you can easily change the width of that. I think I already mentioned it, but you can easily change the width by adding too much pressure. But if you want a nice, long, thin line, you want to stabilize your hand nicely, okay, steady brush stroke. You can start really skinny and press down a little bit as you work your way down and make it a little thicker at the base. But let's see if I can do this on my pad here. We'll start with a nice, there we go, and then slightly begin to add pressure to thicken it as we work our way down. Okay. So again, lots of versatility with this brush. Leaves. Okay. If we were to be making a tree, I would use a larger brush to make the trunk. One of my flat brushes, even something like one of these wash brushes, I could take, right? Going back to the wash brush. You know what? I'm gonna go and start using more of the brushes in my kit. So let's see here. This is a little bit of overkill. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily use this one for this small of a tree, but I could. But let's see here. I'm gonna use this one right here. Okay. Just gonna grab some paint right off of the lid here. Again, this paint has really nice flow to it already, so I don't have to mix in any water. I could if I want. Okay, now I just got to be careful on the edges. I turn my brush to the thin part. Trees are generally thicker at the bases. I don't know that there's any trees that aren't like that, but thicker at the base and right, thinner as they go up. So there's a tree. Talking about versatility, I could take this brush, press it down, make it skinny at the tip, okay, and I could add a branch right here. I probably wouldn't go too far out with that branch, something like that. It just I'm running a risk of making it larger accidentally very easily. But then I would switch to my round brush or a different brush, like an angle brush, which I'll be demonstrating here in a little bit. But now I start to add more of those branches. Where would my little round one go here? Give me a second. There it is. Grab some paint. And I use my finger here. I press it up against my canvas or pad or paper, whatever you got. Stabilizes my hand. Look at how I went from thick to thin by varying the pressure on my brush. Again, these round brushes, I can use them for drawing. Let's say that I'm drawing Baby Yoda. What the heck? Why not? We did Baby Yoda on my page a while back. Some time ago, we painted Baby Yoda. So let's do a real quick outline of Baby Yoda. Now, normally, if I want real good precision and not have to worry about having to go back and fix things, I would draw it in first with pencil. But you can draw with paint, right? Again, I'm still using this round brush. Ideally, I'd go to a smaller one. But here's the top of Baby Yoda's head. I'm just using the very tip of my brush. His ears come out. Okay, goes down underneath. Right? So you can see I can draw a little bit with this. I would do his eyes. Then I could go in there and fill it all in, put his mouth in, his ears, etc., etc., etc. But you can draw pretty intricate lines with these brushes. But again, because they vary the shapes that you can create with this, you can vary the pressure and create different shapes. It's a really nice, versatile brush. I can also use this to fill the inside, right, like of whatever it is that I just drew. All right. Any questions so far? I'm going to look over at the comments section here in just a moment. Okay. I do want to use my water cup to clean up my brushes a little bit. I grab this, put it back into my bin here where everything's laying sideways to protect our brushes. All right. Any questions about anything? Let's see here. All right, guys. So it looks, I think everybody's just kind of paying attention and maybe even practicing over there on your own. Again, any questions, go ahead and put them up in the comments section. I'll be more than happy to address them. Okay, so here we go. Let's change our, for those of you that are wondering, this here is my mixed media Canson paper pad. Now this is a 114-pound paper pad, really good for all sorts of media. You can paint on it. Because of acrylic paints, oftentimes we water them down. Thinner pads or thinner paper will get a little soggy and warp. These hold up a little bit better. These are really good for paintings that you don't necessarily want to keep, or you don't care if they're not on canvas. These save a lot of time. It's a lot of space. Excuse me, save a lot of space. They come in varying sizes. These are really nice especially to do practice work on. All right, next brush, the angle brush, angular. The angular brush is another one of my favorites. If you have a filbert and you have an angular brush, you can get a lot done. Now, an angular brush of course, is cut at an angle. It's real similar to a flat brush, except it has an angled head. These, especially the stiffer brushes, are really, really nice for a few things. One of them is making long, thin lines. I like to use this when I make stems. What I'll do is I'll grab my brush and just flatten out the tip by pressing down on the sides. Okay, I can come in here and make really long, skinny lines. Okay, now I can also vary that a bit, just like I did with the round brush or the filbert brush, by pressing down as I go. I start really light with a light touch, and then I press down as I go. That increases the thickness of my brush stroke. These here are really nice. Again, I keep going back to leaves and flowers because they encompass a lot of shapes that are often used in other things. But leaves, okay, you can, by using just the little point, you can do, depending on how hard you press down, you can make lots of little dots, little points. You can use this to make stars in your sky. This is called this is the toe. The long part is called the toe. That's the heel. Okay, long part is the toe. The back part, kind of like on a shoe or a foot, right? A heel, and then the toe. By using the toe, you can do little dots. Okay, you can do things like a ribbon, a nice ribbon. Let's say, for example, you're kind of doing this. Okay, you can. Okay, do some really fun, neat things with this brush. Let's see here. Let's say that I've got this long stem here, and I want to make some leaves coming off of it. Let's see here. We'll make them come this way. Okay. By varying that pressure, I can make long leaves, short leaves. I can also start with just the very tip of the toe, and then press down on all of it, and it creates a nice long line. This is really good for making things like flowers, petals, and I'll show you guys. I'm gonna have a tutorial on roses in about a week. Be on the lookout for that. It's gonna prep us for, let me show you really quickly. It's always best to learn, right, when you're actually creating a painting, maybe a complete painting. Whoops, my pages got stuck there. So in a bit, I'm going to show you guys, what the heck? Technical difficulties. Give me a second. Before you turn the page, it's always a good idea to let your paint dry, okay? FYI. Otherwise, you'll learn the hard way like I sometimes do. So in a couple of weeks, let me grab the painting really quick. We've got a painting that is going to incorporate a bunch of roses. Now the technique, actually, let me grab the painting really quickly. So, a couple of weeks, week and a half or so, we are doing, for those of you that wish to join me, we're going to be painting this right here, completely freehand. There's no stencil for this one. Trust me, the umbrella is not the hard part on this. A bunch of those flowers that are in there. So I'm going to be teaching you how to make those roses specifically sometime like a few days before we actually do the session. But to make these roses, you can use a flat brush or an angled brush, an angular brush. Okay, I'm going to show you really quickly what you can do with that angular brush in creating things like those rose petals. Let's see, should I switch to a smaller one or should I use my big one here? We'll start with the big one, why not? So, clean it up a little bit. Now this isn't going to be, I'm not going to sit there and take too much time with this. I just want to give you an idea. So if you're interested in making some roses, you're going to want to join me for that session, for the rose making session. There's different types of roses. There's different ways to make roses. This is not the only way. Just want to make sure. I've made roses in the past that are really, really detailed, and I did not use an angled brush for it. I used other types of brushes that allowed me to do lots of shading and we don't want white, we want paint, shading and things like that. This is a kind of a general, almost impressionistic type of rose. So, but they do come out really nicely. Okay, I've got my, go and switch my view back here. There we go. Okay. What I like to do with this, I have two colors here. And I can do this with three colors, but typically you do with two colors. I'll have on the heel, I'll have the darker color. And on the toe, I'll have the lighter color. Okay? And I'll see that lighter color on the toe, darker on the heel. Okay, what I'll do, I'll come in here and just we're going to work through this kind of quickly. Okay, so there's some petals on the outside. Go like this. Here's the little center of our flower. Okay. And you can kind of, I'm keeping the dark color for now on the bottom part. Loading. I can just kind of do this diptych since they're right next to each other. Okay. Now, if I would let that dry a little bit before I would come in and add more detail to it, but I would lighten my edges a little, maybe taking a little bit of white. Okay, I'm still using my angled brush. Okay. All this is getting done with my angular brush. I could come in here and highlight some of the edges up on top. Okay, I would come in and darken up some areas. So you have this, as you start to add the different effects with your highlights and your darker areas, you'll start to get a nice little rose there. Then I could take the same angular brush, gonna mix a little bit of green and a little bit of yellow. Grab some yellow right here, bring it over to the side, mix a little bit of those two together, maybe kind of swirly. Have a lime green there. I could do something like this. I could. Okay. Now again, after this dries, and I could do just like on the umbrella, I would do that to a bunch of our roses first, and then I would come in and start to refine them a little bit more, add more of the lighter colors and the darker colors to give it more dimension. But that's the start of a really nice rose. Again, and all we did here was use the angular brush. I could create roses with just a little tiny round brush, right? But something like this, really nice to create with an angled brush. You could draw with this thing, just like with the other brushes. You could draw. You could take this and, for example, draw something. I don't know, whatever. Baby Yoda, a butterfly. That was the beginning. It looked like the beginning of a butterfly, right? So again, really nice, versatile brush. Oh, the whimsical tree. The whimsical tree is coming. It's sitting behind me going, hey, when are you going to paint me? It's been asking too. So maybe we'll do it. Maybe we'll do it by the end of this month, this coming month. Okay? But yeah, that's going to be a good one. She is talking about this baby right here. Okay? This really cool piece. This one we're going to be using a fan brush to create some of the effects on. Well, we could use a fan brush. All right, so that's an angle brush, the angular, and the angular brushes typically you'll see them as in the United States you'll see them 3/4 inch, half an inch. They're in the imperial system of measurement. I have yet to see one using the metric system, but they may be out there. I don't know why it is that those would generally be, or at least the ones that I've seen would generally be in inches as opposed to millimeters, but that's what I've seen. Okay, but all right, let's continue. So what I would like to talk about now is the fan brush, the famous fan brush. Okay, looks kind of like this. Looks like a fan. A couple things about the fan brush. The fan brush actually has a curved. If you hold it up like this, it's actually curved. It's got a rounded set of bristles. Okay, they're not straight, all straightforward. They're rounded. There's always a rounded side. Looks like a smiling face or a frown, depending on which way you're looking at it. Okay, very important to know that. Now, this is a synthetic bristle brush. So the stiffer the bristles, and this goes for all the other types of brushes out there. There are hog's hair bristle brushes. Oftentimes, those are just referred to as bristle brushes. They're really hard. They feel like almost like wires. Okay. Depending on the painting that you're using, those generally, especially on the cheaper end, will give you a much coarser brush stroke. You'll see brush lines in your painting, which is pretty cool. Some people like that. I enjoy seeing brush strokes, but it depends on the type of finish that you want to have. This fan brush here is synthetic, tends to be really soft in comparison to those stiffer ones, and they each can be used for something different. If you wet this too much, if you load it up with too much paint, the synthetic one, they'll start to droop because they start to clump up like this. Okay, but you can use this to make things like hair, grass blades, trees. You can use these for density in tree leaves. So I'm just loading up the tip of the bristles here. And again, you got to remember they're curved. They have a slight curvature to them. You could do something like, let's say, a weeping willow. All I'm doing is touching the tip of the bristles to my paper. Okay. You could create bushes with this. You could use this to add details on clouds. Now, I'm going to start incorporating this fan a little bit more in my painting sessions because there are some really nice uses. Makes things go a little bit more quickly. But let's say, for example, that we're making a weeping willow. This is one way you could do that. Or let's say our tree that we did a little bit ago. Let's see if I can go back to that thing. That's if my it's going to tear, so let's not chance that. But let's say we've got some branches. We put out some branches with one of our round brushes or one of our angled brushes, and we want to add some leaves to it. We've got a tree like this. Okay, maybe it's a tree that's off in the distance, not a very large tree. Okay, this is a round brush. This is a number 6 round. Let's say we've got some branches coming out in the way. Something like that. Okay. You could use this to come in here. You can create a lot of density in leaves very quickly by doing this. And you could do this with variations of shades of this green, or maybe it's autumn and some of the leaves are turning brown or yellow, etc. You would do something like this, let this dry for a few minutes while you're working on other parts of your painting, and then you'd come back and you would right over the top again. Okay, go right over the top. You could also let me grab a little bit of brown and some yellow. Just grabbing some brown here, some yellow. Not colorblind, at least not that I know of. Just taking some yellow, putting it down on my plate here. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of brown. Just kind of let them blend a little bit. Grab a little bit more yellow. Want more yellow in this. Now I can come in here using maybe the edge, one of the edges. I can start creating some little bushes. Little bushes here in the ground. Okay. One little bush. Got a little bush next to it. Okay. And again, folks, I'm not going through every single thing that you can do with these. I'm just giving you a really nice general idea. Okay. You can also come in here, for example, and do things like grass, like grass blades. Oops, let me. For grass blades and things like that, you want to use a stiffer bristle, okay, so that they don't clump up, kind of like what this is starting to do with the paint that I'm using. Something like this synthetic bristle brush, it's better for doing stuff like that. But you can take this. You can paint hair with this, even this brush here. You can actually create highlights and hair. Let's say you've got them. You painted somebody and there's hair flowing, right? You can use this to come in and do little tiny highlights. A grass. Go back to the grass. So let's say we got some. You can create a lot of density by doing this, turning it. If you need thinner, smaller grass blades, you would get a smaller brush. But again, the stiffer, more wiry fan brushes are better for that kind of thing. But this, as you can see, it's still not bad. These are also good for adding details and things like the clouds. And a little bit when we go back to that cloud that I started at the beginning, I'll use this to come in and add a little bit of detail on the edges at the top. White detail, the lightest part of the cloud. It makes for a really nice highlighting tool. Okay? So there's your fan brush. Again, general use for your fan brush. Let's clean it up a little bit. As you can see, I've got some blue pigment here. It's already changing the color of my brush. Even if I take this and run it under some dish soap, and that's how I do clean. I generally use either dish soap to clean my brushes. Most of my brushes get cleaned with dish soap. My really nice brushes, when I use my expensive brushes, I will use a cleaner specifically for cleaning paint. There's a company that makes, there's a few of them, right? There's lots of different companies that make this stuff, but there is a brush cleaner company, B&J, that you can use it basically conditions your brushes and helps them keep their shape and stuff. When we're all done, I will talk about how to clean them for those of you that are new and want to be able to take care of your brushes, know how to clean them up, how to take care of them. We will talk about that at the very end. I won't demonstrate because I'd have to go over to the sink and do it, and I don't want to do that. Let's see, what is the best brush for mixing paints? Awesome question. Very, very awesome question, Pam. So what I like to use to mix paints, I usually end up using a big brush. And I wasn't going to really talk about this today, but since you asked the question, these palette knives, and you'll see these often in plastic. Okay, these palette knives are really, really good for mixing paint. You don't waste paint with these guys, right? Oftentimes you'll see me when I do my sessions, all the time you'll see me mix paint with larger brushes. Depends on the area and how much paint I'm going to be using. But palette knives, and you can get some really cheap ones made out of plastic. And I have a couple over on the side. They come in different shapes. But to mix paint, let's say, for example, I'm mixing those two colors there. I just scoop up some paint, bring it over to the side, grab my pink, and I do this. That is actually the best way to mix colors, using a palette knife. Palette knives are also really nice for painting thick. There's lots of really cool things that you can do with a palette knife. We'll save videos of that stuff for a later time. Palette knife work, I don't plan on incorporating much in my paintings anytime soon, but I will in the future. But here, you can blend as much as you want. You can just continue blending, 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 so you have a nice even tone, even color, or you can blend and leave it swirly, as is often the case. Swirly paint, depends on what it is you're trying to make, can be really cool. But a palette knife is really good for doing some really cool things. A lot of fun with these. Look at these petals. Whoops. Really fun. You do some really cool stuff with palette knives. Okay, nice long straight lines. You can, like I said, paint really thickly with these. When I do my portraits, sometimes I will use these to paint on the clothing. because it creates it's a little bit of a randomness to it that is kind of cool. So let's say that I can use this to paint in something, right? Let's say I want to paint in this bunny ear or a butterfly. Kind of do this. There's less control with this. But palette knives are really nice. Anyway, one of the big uses, one of the best, actually, for me, the best way to mix paint is with a palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, then simply grab, it just depends on how much paint you need to mix. For my larger, if I need a lot of paint, I would use a larger brush. And I just, mostly using the tip of the brush. I don't want to use the whole brush so that the whole brush doesn't get saturated with paint, and then I end up wasting paint, especially if I'm not going to use that brush to paint with. Sometimes I'll use a big brush to do my mix, but I'm not necessarily going to use that brush to paint with. And I like to use the big flat brushes to do my mixtures, okay, to do my mixing. Something like this, nice flat, okay, brush that it's not really thick at the base. The thicker the brush, the more paint it's going to absorb, and the more paint you're going to waste. Okay, so let's say I was using this brush to mix. I would just be using the tip of the brush like this. I wouldn't be using the whole brush, right? You just kind of do this. I'm holding the brush perpendicularly against the plate, and I just do this all the way around, all the way around, all the way around. And again, it depends on how much I want to blend. Do I want to blend it completely, or do I want it kind of swirly where I see some of both colors and variations in between? Okay. When you're doing this, it's really easy to saturate your brush, so you want to be careful, right? So again, you don't waste paint, but also you don't want that paint to run down into your metal part, your ferrule part of that brush. Okay. So anyway, let me put my mic back on. Good thing I've got a good mic here. Otherwise, you guys wouldn't be able to hear me. So I forgot to put it back on, but it's all good. Okay, so let's see here. The next brush I would like to talk about is what you call a liner brush. Okay, actually, this is called a this is more of a rigger brush. Rigger brush tends to be really long and pointy. These are really good for signing names, for detail work. Okay. These are not as good for drawing because they're so long, and they tend to be when you saturate them with paint and with water, they tend to be too soft, a little too soft for drawing. But you can. Okay, let me grab a little bit of water. The ones that are better for drawing are the round brushes, the small round brushes like a 0 or a 3-0 or a 4-0. It depends on how much detail or how small of detail you need to make. But these rigger brushes or liner brushes tend to be longer in comparison to, whoops, let's see here. Grab this guy right here. To these round. The round tends to be a little stockier, but they go into a nice point. And of course, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And those are really nice for drawing, especially when you need exact lines. So these rigger brushes can be used for little tiny details, little tiny lines, things that just require intricate, but not necessarily exact detail. Okay, so just load up on the paint. And the same with the round. If you press it against your plate and spin it, these get really tiny and pointy. Now with these, you can come in, watch up, and again, what did we say earlier? You can do things. If I wanted to sit here, I can make a bunch of grass blades, right? It would take a long time, but I could. Overlapping, and if I'm using just the very point, they get really, really tiny. I can make really tiny lines. This is like a number 2 rigger, maybe a number 1. But same as with everything else, the smaller you go, the better. These are also really good for signing things like your name. Okay, you could use these guys to write. I tend to end up using quite a bit of water with these when I use them, because the water helps that paint flow, and I'm able to create really tiny detail work. I could also use this for small leaves like this. Let's say I was using green. I was coming over. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna grab some yellow. Instead of doing that in blue, I'm going to grab yellow and do it. Okay, just dip my brush right into that yellow. Okay, and I can come in here and I'm just tapping the very tip of it. Let me see. I'm going to bring a little close up. So the rigger, right, is good for this, or liner. It's called a rigger or liner brush. I know it's annoying that they use different names for them because it can be a little confusing and frustrating, but it is what it is, right? Can't really change that. There's no universal standard for this. So I could also come in here and use this for details here in my bush. A little bush now, by overlapping over the dry part, the brown dry area. Now I start to add a little bit of depth, give it a little dimension. Okay. I could also use something like this to give my flower some detail, a little bit. Okay, I would grab maybe a little bit of white and mix it with a little bit of red, just kind of create a little bit of that pink. And I could come in here and do things like outline some of these areas in between. Okay. So again, I'm just trying to emphasize that there's no one particular use for every single brush. There are more specialized brushes, but usage is interchangeable. Okay. One thing you don't want to do with your brushes is pull really hard on the bristles. Whenever you're cleaning them, right, whenever you're removing paint, like in my case, what I do is I'll swirl my brush in my water cup, do this a few times to get as much of that paint out of there as I can. Then I kind of do this. Now I can take it and put it into my bin here like this. Okay, where again, it's sitting on the side. All my brushes are sitting on the side, keeping less pressure on top. Your cheap brushes that you don't really care too much about, you can do this with them, but the nicer the brush. Yes, perfect. Valerie Collins. Valerie said the liner is good for the glisten of the sun off of a lake or ocean waves also. Absolutely. You could just kind of go in there and lightly with a really bright color, because that's, you know, you're highlighting in this case, white or yellow, whatever it is that you're using in a situation like that, and just create little tiny lines in there that create that light reflection in water. Okay, so but liners are amazing for that kind of stuff. And then of course the small round brush, and I'm going to demonstrate with this one right here. Okay, the smaller, the more detail, and it's really similar to what I did earlier with the larger one, but these are really, really nice. These are my preferred brushes to draw with, to outline with. If it's a curved outline that I'm talking about, let's say again, as in a face. When we did the Cat in the Hat a few weeks back, when we did The Nightmare Before Christmas, when we did any of the caricatures where we're outlining, anything that requires outline, where we're doing a house, a barn, etc. These, they're stiff, the bristles stay together. I grab paint, I spin my brush, and I'm able to make really, really tiny lines. Lots of people will ask, how do you make little, tiny, tiny lines? Well, this is the way, to quote the Mandalorian. Okay? Little, tiny, tiny lines. Like, you know, this is detail work, and I'm just using the very tip of my brush. So, trees, right? If I wanted to make little, tiny, tiny, tiny dots and leaves and things like that, this is what I could use. If I'm going to draw something freehand, this is what I would use. especially if it's really small. Again, if we go back to Baby Yoda, right? You're able to draw, kind of by pressing down. Then you're also now going to get a variation. You can make long, wide lines. You can make skinny lines that get thick as you go down to the base. You could start thick and go to thin. Get lots of really cool stuff with these round brushes. Okay. Right? So, but this is what you use. And the smaller, of course, kind of obvious, but the smaller the brush, the more detail, the smaller detail you can work in. Lots of beginners, when they go to paint something, for whatever reason, and I think it's kind of almost obvious, right? They'll start with something on a small canvas or on a small piece of paper, thinking that because it's smaller, it's going to be easier to do. But if they don't have small brushes, it actually is a lot harder to do, okay? Because everything's so tiny and you're using large brushes for what should be really tiny brushes, and that can be really, really frustrating. So size in this case, right? Case of all these different brushes, you want to use the right size for whatever it is that you are doing. The larger the area that you're working with, the larger the brush. But these little tiny round brushes are really good for detail and intricate work. Okay. But all right. And I believe I've covered everything. I have a nice small, in my group here, I got a nice little small mop. Actually, this one looks more like a filbert to me, but it does have some variation in thickness. The filbert this small would be quite a bit thinner. So there is a small mop brush in this group. I thought I had a small, yeah, there it is. Okay, little angle brush, a nice tiny little angular brush here. Really cool. But those are all the main types of brushes. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay, let me show you guys a brush that I didn't demonstrate earlier. Okay, you guys sometimes see the horsehair bristle brushes that come in some of those cheaper packs of brushes. That's this guy right here. This is the brush that is going to lose. Let me see if I can focus on it. Give me a sec. I know it's a little out of focus, so let me see if we can get this into focus. Okay. So this brush here is a horsehair, very cheap brush. It is good for things like blending. It is good for, it does have some uses. The bristles splay out very easily. It's hard to get this brush to get a flat edge. It's almost impossible to do. But these tend to lose their bristles as you're painting. These are typically the brushes that people use when you're losing bristles as you're painting. The bristles are ending up in your paint. It's typically this kind of brush, and I just pulled out a few of them that just came flying out. But once they get wet, once they start getting paint on them, these start to, get bad really quickly. I do not like these brushes, but they do have their uses. You can blend with them. These are kind of similar to the mop brush in that sense. You can do some really cool things. I'm using the dry brush method here, just using the paint that's already on the canvas to kind of pull it out, blend it, thin it out a bit, and already I've got bristles on the plate here, on the pad. So again, these I stay away from like the plague. They just really, really annoy me. I've never met anyone that likes them, but you can, because of the nature of the bristle and they kind of splay out and stuff, you can use these to create things like really dense bushes. You could, for example, grab some yellow paint here, and I'm just pressing this paint into the plate, and that kind of spreads my bristles out a bit. And I can just come in here and lightly tap. The bristles are spread out a little bit. I think they'll create a nice little thin layer of yellow in this case, adding to the density of the bush, making it look a little more realistic. Okay, but these horsehair bristle brushes, I think they get them off of the horse's tail, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, those are no good. I don't like them. Some of you might like them, and that's okay. I just wanted to point that out. I didn't talk about this brush earlier. Lots of times when we're painting, I'll get people putting in a message in the comment section, hey, I'm losing all my bristles. Why are my bristles all falling out? Oftentimes it's this kind of brush, and of course, the cheaper the brush, the less or more likely you're going to have issues with it. But anyway, these often come in some of those variety packs with like 25, 30 brushes in them for like 10 bucks. Some of the brushes in those variety packs are really good. And then others are like this. And I try to stay away from those. But anyway, I'm going to go back here to my cloud. And like I said, eventually I plan on doing some cloud tutorials with lots of different ways to make clouds using different colors and stuff like that. What is stuck over here? Whenever I use these, I pull them out. Let's say I'm done with the painting, I pull it off. Okay. Again, I got some paint that got stuck back here that dried on some of the ones underneath. I don't normally keep my paintings in my pads, although I do. In some cases I do when I'm experimenting and things like that. But oftentimes I just pull them out of the pad. If you're not going to pull them out of the pad, make sure you let them completely dry before you turn the page over. Kind of a no-brainer, I know, but just needed to make sure I talk about that. So cloud, nice and dry right in here. Okay, I can take my mop, my big mop brush or my smaller mop brush. We'll start with the big one. Maybe we'll transition over to the smaller one. Take a paper towel here. My mop brush is in my water bin on its side, or almost completely on its side. Just going to squeeze out all that extra water. Now I could grab another brush and add a little bit of paint over the top of that, and then come in with the mop brush using the dry mop brush method to lightly paint over the top of that, right, and spread that paint around. Or I could take paint directly with the mop brush and start creating my cloud, or adding more on my cloud. I'm going to do that. I'm going to just grab a little bit. Don't need a lot. Okay? Don't need a lot of paint. Now I can come in here. First I'll do this. I'll start with the cloud in the front. This is also good for making mountains. Okay? Some distance, off in the distance, mountains. And I'll start doing this again. As I do this, this new layer of paint starts to interact with the dry paint that's in the back. White paint tends to be transparent, right? The lighter the paint, it doesn't tend to. It is transparent, so it'll pick up some of the hue of the stuff that's in the background. Now I can use this method. I can do this about 3, 4, 5 times. And the more times I do this, the more like a cloud this will become, because the layers in the front start to get brighter and brighter and brighter, playing off of the layer behind it. Eventually we get to a point where this is a really nice, smooth, clean looking cloud. Now we're not going to go all the way out and create, that kind of a cloud. We're not going to go that far into it with this, but you're already kind of getting an idea. Now this cloud in the back, before I did the one in the front, I would have come in and done the same thing that I just did to the cloud in the front to the one behind it, so that I wouldn't have that blue underneath it. But we're not gonna do that today. I'm just showing you what this does. These mop brushes create really awesome billowy clouds, and you can overlap. You can do that a lot. You can create a sky full of these really cool clouds. Once this layer dries, I can grab my fan brush. I can grab, let's see, one of my round brushes. Let's see, grab my round brush here and add some of that detail. Now, ideally, I like to wait again till this is dry. I could take a blow dryer and dry it, but no need for that. I'm just going to dip my brush right in there and I'll come in here to the very tops of my clouds. In this case, I want the tops of my clouds to be the brightest part. And not every single cloud top is going to be bright, but the ones that are closer to us, are going to get some of this. And again, I'm just kind of using the very tips of these bristles. A little fan brush, I can push up a little bit to kind of, okay. And I can even take this same fan brush and maybe over here, maybe we've got another cloud here. Little tiny one drifting in the front all by itself. Okay. Okay, something like that. Little by little, you work that in and you create a really nice cloud sky. And like I said, we will be doing a tutorial specifically on clouds so that you guys learn how to really develop some beautiful, amazing clouds with reds in them, with yellow in them, with blues and all this other stuff. One thing that I often do with my clouds is if there's a layer that's still kind of wet down here, I would take a flat or a filbert and I could kind of, so let's say that I had a wet layer down in here, I would just take that using the dry brush method and I would just kind of spread it a little bit, giving the bottom of my clouds kind of a, it just kind of flattens it out a little bit, makes the bottom of the cloud almost look like it's moving. It gives the cloud a little bit of movement. But I would just lightly spread the bottom of the cloud so it starts to, looks like almost like the bottom of the cloud is beginning to disperse a little bit. Okay. I could also use a round brush, just grabbing, paint from the very tip, and I could do something kind of similar that I did with the fan brush. Just kind of come in. I'm just kind of dabbing. I mentioned earlier, right? There's different ways to do this. Now watch. I'll take the bottom part of the cloud and I just kind of spread it. There's very little paint left on my brush. That the bottom part starts to kind of look like it starts to blend into the area underneath it, but it also creates almost that a little bit of movement. I'll do that again. I'll do it in here too. We're going to create a little cloud right in here using my round brush. And I'm pushing. And now right in here, I just can spread this a little bit. I don't have a whole lot of paint left on that brush. Just kind of go over the same area over and over. I can now take my towel, it's lightly damp. Just, okay. So little by little, that starts to form a really nice cloud. But all right, everybody, let's take a look at any questions. Any questions, anybody? I know, I'm sure some of you guys have questions, so please make sure you put them down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. There's a lot of detail, a lot of information. There's a lot that you can do with all of these different brushes, and this is just the basics. Again, I want to emphasize that some people will prefer to use the angular brush to make leaves and flower and petals, or they might like the angular for leaves, for stems, and then they want a filbert for for the petals. Somebody may like a bright flat over a regular flat or a flat wash to do certain things. The liner brush, the rigger brush, and the round brush, the rigger brush and the round brush, the rigger interchangeable with the liner, can be used for similar things, right? It depends on the application. But everyone, as you go along, especially if you're really new, my recommendation is just go for it. You're not going to learn. You can hear what everything I say or anything anybody else says that maybe you might be learning from, but the best thing to do is to just start. Grab yourself a set of brushes. You can get really nice sets of brushes for starter brushes like at places like Walmart. There's a brand called Princeton. The Princeton brush brand is a really good one. Everything from their basic brushes to their higher end brushes is a really nice brand. They sell them on Amazon. You can find those different places, but if you haven't got any good brushes yet, that would be a good place to start. Artist Loft also makes some good brushes. Synthetic, right now I'm talking about synthetic bristle brushes. As you go further into your painting, at some point, you might decide you want to use some natural fiber hair brushes. The ones that are comparable to the synthetic ones, they tend to be a little bit better quality, although today the lines are blurred quite a bit. I've been painting for about 15 years, and what I notice is a lot of the synthetics come really, really close. In many cases, you can't tell the difference. But you know, those higher quality brushes come at a higher quality cost. Whether you're looking for a synthetic brush, high quality brush like a Treacle or the Princeton or the you got Grumbacher, you got all these different brands out there. And I know it's a little confusing. You start to look for brushes, you're like going, oh my gosh, which one do I get? Start with a good quality basic set of brushes. If you are interested, in the description of the video, and I'll do a post sometime later this evening. I'll do a post like I did a couple of weeks ago, where I put in recommended supplies. In the description of the video, I've already got a few links in there. If you guys want to go check those out, you can click on them. It'll take you right over to Amazon. Of course, Amazon isn't everybody's cup of tea. If you don't like Amazon, don't worry about it. You don't have to get them from there. But you can look at reviews and you can look at descriptions and things like that right on Amazon. There's a couple of Princeton set basic brush sets that I put in there. You'll notice there is a cost. There's like 4 or 5 brushes, and they're like something like close to like $20. Okay, so one brush, my mop brush, my Princeton mop brush. Okay, this one, and I don't remember the price. I think this one was like $11, $12 or something like that, $9, $10. But this is a Princeton brush, the one that I showed you with the clouds. This is a nice brush, and there's higher quality brushes of this brand. But the higher quality of the brush, the higher the cost. You don't have to go too crazy. You will find some good quality brushes at a lower cost. Like I mentioned, there's the Princeton Velvet Touch brand. You can get a good, I think something like a 5-6 brush set, and they're somewhere around $30. I can't quite remember. Like I said, there's a link in the description of the video if you guys are interested. Also, something that some of you may want to invest in other than multimedia paper. And I don't have any plain ones to show you, but there's such a thing as canvas paper. Okay, canvas paper tries to mimic the feel of a canvas, an actual canvas, right? The surface is kind of similar. You can get some similar quality finishes or similar types of finishes as you do on a canvas. But what's good about the canvas paper is they're easy to store. It's just a thin piece of paper. I've used those in the past. When I was painting portraits, I did a lot of them in using canvas paper. Now, canvas paper isn't cheap. They'll run you about the cost of a canvas, but they're thin. You can save them. You can save all your paintings in a pad, just like you would these multimedia papers. Okay, this is an oil piece that I did about 5 or 6 years ago, and if I was to take the back off, you would see it's just a piece of canvas paper. Again, the finish is really similar. I'll show you. Anyway, but what I'm trying to say is that is a good option instead of multimedia paper. If you want something closer to a canvas, you can use these canvas papers. Whoops, give me a second. My microphone is caught up on the back of my frame here. These canvas papers, like I said, the surface is kind of rough and coarse, kind of like a canvas, or very similar to a canvas. It's thin, but these are really good for acrylic or oil. These are in oil, little portraits that I did back a few years ago. Now, stuff like this, especially when I use my oil, when I do oil paints, I will use my higher end brushes. I just like the way they feel, the way, everything from the way when you hold them, when you're simply holding them, really, really nice. They have a really nice feel to them. There's a difference. But Everything that I've shown you today, that Conda set that I've used for some of my demonstration, that's a pretty good brush set. There's a big variety in that. All those brushes that I talked about and more are in that set. But if you want to get fancier, you want to get a little bit, brushes that are a little nicer, then you're going to spend a little bit more. But I do believe it's well worth it. If you want it easier on yourself as you're learning, then you want to get a nice brush set. Here's another one that I did on. This isn't on canvas again. This is on paper, on the canvas paper. But again, real similar finish to a canvas board. In my opinion, good brushes are just as important as your paint, and often, in many cases, it's more important. There's a lot of frustration that some people will experience when they first start painting because they're using the wrong brushes. But wrong also sometimes means low quality. If you have a low quality brush, and I'm not talking anything super expensive. Again, I've mentioned a few of them that are really nice sets that are good bang for your buck, 20, 30 bucks for a basic set. And you'll have a much better experience, much better outcome with your paintings. And that goes a long way to keeping people interested in painting, right? If there's a lot of frustration, especially when you're first starting, you're like, I don't want to paint. This isn't working out for me. The better your tools, the better the outcome. Okay. So if you have been painting for a little bit and you're looking to improve, that is one step you can take. Getting better brushes will improve the quality of your paintings. Now, one thing that I might suggest is maybe only purchase, you can buy single brushes of the higher quality ones. You can buy single brushes like these. This is my little Vienna angular brush from Artist Loft. I believe you can find these on Amazon. If you use the links in the description, you'll start seeing some of those brushes that I listed, and then you can also just start searching through there. But this brush, I think I mentioned, was about 12 bucks. Just one brush by itself, but it is a really, really nice brush. Feels nice. Maybe buy a couple like this. Your basics, an angular, a flat, maybe a filbert, and start experimenting. Start playing around with them, seeing how you feel. The brush, maybe the one or two brushes that you use the most, maybe get one of each of those in a nicer brush and see how you like it. Look at the finish. Okay. Soon we'll be doing another painting on another session on paint. We'll talk about paint. Now, paint isn't quite as complex. There's still quite a lot of variety, but we'll talk about the types of acrylic paint that's out there. Heavy body, paint with more flow. You've got pouring paint, right? Paint, whenever the paint pours that people like to do, they've become really popular over the last few years. Those are paints that are really flowy. They're meant to be poured out, and they cover and spread out really quickly. Those are nice paints to use for particular applications. There's thick body paint with a lot of pigment. Those are thicker. Those are sometimes harder to spread across a canvas. So I will be doing a tutorial on paint. We're still sticking with acrylic paint. Maybe in the future we'll start talking about oil painting down the road. That is my first love. I really, really enjoy oil painting, but there's different stuff going on there. But we'll also be talking about maybe mediums that you could add into your acrylic paint to make it thicker, to give it more body, to thin it out, to slow down the drying time, to give you more time to work on your painting, right? Oftentimes, as we're going through sometimes some paintings, we don't want them to dry out very quickly because we want to be able to work, with wet paint for a while. There are mediums that you can use to mix into your paint to keep them from drying so quickly. And then, of course, there's the opposite. If you want to dry them really quickly, there's varnishes. Varnishes are meant to protect your paintings. Whenever you make a painting and then you really, really want to preserve it, let's say it's something that you really like, you want to keep it for a long time. Once it's fully dried, you want to varnish it. And there's varnishes that have a gloss, there's a matte, there's a semi-gloss, right? There's varnishes that you spray on. There's varnishes that you brush on. So there's lots of intricate components with painting that don't just involve painting, right? And the reason, back to the varnish part of it, the reason why you want to varnish it, paintings will fade over time, especially if they're in direct sunlight. If you've got a painting near a window and there's lots of sunlight scattered around, it will fade. That's one. Two, dust particles can damage your paintings, so a good coat of varnish protects them. Eventually, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, the varnish yellows. You'll have to remove it. You can strip it and then add another coat of varnish over that, right? So there's all sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff that goes into play. And the more you paint, the more fun it is. I mean, as I've been growing and painting over the years, there's just so many different avenues. And what I find is there's not enough time, right? I could paint all day if I wanted to. I would love to experiment with all sorts of different stuff. Sculpting, I've sculpted a little bit, right? Pottery, you want to experiment with so many different mediums, but there's only so much time. But so as you're growing in your artistic journey, just know that there's a lot more to it. And right now we've barely scratched the surface. For those of you that have been painting for a little bit, maybe you've been painting with me or painting on your own or painting with somebody else, etc. You know, you're a little further ahead in the game. You know how to work paint and what water does to it. You know how to, some technique on blending and things like that. Like I said, what I'll be doing as I continue with these live events, all of the tutorials that I do, I'm going to incorporate more of these more specialized brushes. When we create clouds, when we do blending, that sort of thing, I'll be using some of these brushes. I don't want to make it too complex, or maybe what I'll do is I'll rate each of my sessions where, I'll give them a number rating, and the more complex, the more likely we are to use one of these brushes. But as you guys always see in the description of the video, I put down what brushes we'll be using. I don't want to scare off any of the newer painters, right? And people that would like to start but don't know how, by making it too complex. If I make it too difficult for them to start, then they're going to go, nope, too many brushes, too expensive, that sort of thing. So maybe I'll do tiers, I don't know, but I will be incorporating more of these specialized brushes as we go. Keep in mind that usually, though, what you can do with these more specialized brushes, you can find a way to do that with other tools. Paper towels sometimes are good for blending, for creating bases of clouds. You can use more basic brushes to create some similar effects. Clouds and things like that can be made with flat brushes and round brushes. It just sometimes takes a little bit more time, and it's a different technique and that kind of thing. But let's see. Annie O says, hi, Jesse, trying to take back painting. Absolutely, Annie. Glad to hear that. Painting is, let's see. Pamela says, can the rigger be used to make branches? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Here's the thing, folks. If you have an idea that you could use a brush for something, try it. You're not gonna ruin the brush. I mean, unless you're really manhandling it, smashing it up against your canvas or canvas board or whatever, right? Just go for it. Try it. Experiment. That is the best way that you're going to learn is by experimentation. It is how I learned. I don't have any real formal training. I just started painting. I've been drawing since I was a kid. A lot of you already kind of know a little bit of my artistic background. I've been drawing since I was a really small kid, but I was always really interested in all forms of art, but especially painting. About 15 years ago, I started to dabble in it, maybe a little bit more. I started dabbling in it. And then probably about 10 years ago, I really started to paint. I started with oil painting, painted with oil paintings for years. The paintings that I showed you a little bit ago are all in oil. And then I changed it up to acrylic painting, not so much because I don't like oil. I love oil painting, but because the market for art lessons, especially with the paint parties and home paint parties and stuff like that, started to grow. And I saw an opportunity to move into the acrylic painting area. I had done some paintings in acrylic, and I just kind of went in that direction because of that. But yeah, you want to jump into it. You will learn by doing. Again, it's how I did it. Have patience. Don't be hard on yourself. Take it easy. For some of you, some things are going to be really natural. Other things, not so much. but the right tools will get you really far. So Cheryl Bergerson asks, what's the difference between the bright and the flat brushes? Very, very similar brush. Basically, a bright brush is a type of flat brush, okay? The bright brush tends to be thicker at the base, and it's a little bit shorter also, better for shorter brush strokes. Actually, I think I have that reversed. The flat brush, the wash flat brush, is thicker, so it holds more paint and more water. In other words, meaning thicker, broader. There's especially the base part. So this down in here tends to be a little denser, more density. They taper off as they get to the top, right? But by being a little bit thicker, the wash brush holds more paint. The bright tends to be shorter. Sometimes the edges are slightly tapered, and they tend to be better suited for shorter brush strokes. But really similar uses. I often will use either one interchangeably. Sometimes I'll use a bright to paint my background. It just takes me a few more brush strokes. Okay, a bright brush, especially when I use my, let's say I'm painting a sky, a background. I've got a character, a little goat over here. Can you guys see Mr. Vincent? Mr. Vincent Van Gogh. So the areas, something like this, if I'm doing the background first, or whether I'm doing the background afterwards, I could have painted him, drawn him in, and then I'm painting in around the outside. I'll use a crisscross pattern often. Sometimes I use long brush strokes, especially if I'm painting a background, kind of like the cactus here. Long brush strokes, horizontal brush strokes, okay? But instead, oftentimes I use a crisscross pattern. For those, I'll use the bright brush, okay? Generally, I'll use the bright brush to create those little short brush strokes. There's enough paint on there where I can do this for a while. And then when I require long brush strokes, the flat wash brush, the larger flat wash brush, allows me to carry enough paint to do this or do this. Those really long, smooth brush strokes create a nice, smooth finish. Of course, it depends on the type of bristles on your brush. The nice, soft, synthetic or natural hair, not the coarse ones. There's a difference, and you can tell right away. There's coarse brushes like this one. Okay, it's really wiry. And then here's the equivalent in a nice, soft bristle brush. Okay, this will give you a smoother, cleaner background than this. This one will show up, will give you more lines in your paint. And there's no right or wrong. It's preference. So, but long brush strokes, smoother the background or whatever it is that you're filling in, right? If I'm doing the background on a painting and I want really nice even background, I'll load up my brush. Here we go, right? All the way. I usually start from top to bottom. When my paint starts to run out, I load it up again, and here I go. Top to bottom, top to bottom. Or I can do side to side. Wax on, wax off, right? Wax on, wax off. What's the other one? I don't remember now. But anyway, yeah, that's how this works. But the brights tend to be a little shorter, slightly rounded at the top, but very much interchangeable. You're not going to go wrong if you're interchanging either one of those brushes. They're going to give you a real similar from what I've found. And yes, so perfect. Chris, thank you, Naomi. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Chris, yes, let's talk about cleaning the brushes. So primarily, all I do whenever I'm done with a paint session, it is important that you clean your brushes right away. The last thing you want to do is leave your brushes floating in your water cup or whatever container you're using, facing down like this. If you leave these like this for a few days, when you come back, very likely at least a couple of your brushes will be warped. The shape of your bristles will get changed. Okay, usually it'll curve a little bit, especially if you look at them from the side. So what you want to do is when you're done painting, you're going to take your brushes, whether you're using a cleaner solution like the one that I mentioned earlier, the B&J Masters Masters is what it's called, B&J Masters Cleaning Solution. And again, there's a link for it if you want to look at it. There's a link in the description of the video. I will post those links to my Facebook page on a main post, so it's easier to find, and maybe pin it to the top. If you guys are interested in checking that out, that cleaner is really nice. It restores your brushes. The higher quality of the brush, the more you want to take care of all your brushes, regardless if you want them to last a long time, whether it's a medium end, a lower end, or higher end. Hopefully, you've got brushes that that aren't causing you any frustration, but you want to clean them up. So anyway, a little bit of dish detergent and water. You get a little bit of a mixture going. Don't need a lot of detergent, just a little bit of dish soap, mild dish soap. Maybe put it into a bowl or something, and then you take your brush, you swirl it around inside there, clean it up, run it under the water. As long as the paint is still wet, as long as the brush is still wet, you run it under the water for a few seconds, and then once you've got all that paint out of there, what you do is you take your fingers and you reshape your bristles, put them back into their normal shape, and then if you have a pouch or something, or even just a cup, something where you can store them facing upwards or on their side, you could put them down on the side on the table, as long as there's no weight on the bristles. You don't want to put any weight on the bristles, because that's when they will get deformed. Okay, so a little bit of water, a little bit of dish soap, it goes a long way. The last thing is allowing that you don't want to do, besides leaving your brushes in a water cup like this, is you don't want to leave your brushes full of paint on your table, because once that paint dries, that's really difficult to remove. You can use those brush conditioners to help with that, but I wouldn't chance it. You get paint in here that dries out, your brushes are almost as good as done. Okay, so you don't want to leave any wet paint on there and let that dry, because that will get damaged. But all your other little brushes, again, whatever brush it is, when you're done washing it, reshape it. Make sure you reshape it. If it's a round brush, do this. Okay, reform it. Use your fingers to reform it. Put it in a cup facing upwards, or in a pouch, or whatever it is that you store these on, or sideways. Again, as long as there's no weight on the bristle, you are good to go. But what else, folks? I think that is pretty much it for today's brush lesson tutorial. If you guys run into any questions, send me your questions on Messenger here on Facebook, right? You can also email me directly at paintingwithjesse. I'm pretty busy with all this stuff, but I do try to answer all of the messages that I get, especially if it's a question regarding maybe brushes or technique, etc. As best as I can, I try to get through all of my messages. This Saturday we're doing, and I don't have the painting here, I left it at home, I do believe. Did I not bring it in today? I did not. We're doing, oh, give me a sec. Actually, I did bring it. Hold on one sec. Got paintings everywhere in my studio. Give me one moment. I'll show you what we're doing this Saturday. Okay, I lied. I did not. But we're doing that little bunny. There's a little bunny painting for Easter with a couple little Easter eggs. That's coming up this Saturday. If you guys haven't seen it yet, go take a look at the details under the event page. Simply go to the main Painting with Jesse page, go to the top. You should see an event page tab up there, or you might see a tab that says more. Click on that. It gives you a little drop-down window. Then you're going to see events. Click on that. It'll take you and give you all the details for that event this coming Saturday. It's cute little kind of a kid's painting, but everybody's welcome. Whether you're a kid at heart or an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 6-year-old, you're welcome to come on and paint that cute little Easter egg theme. So Annie, eventually, I think eventually I will be doing some oil painting tutorials. For now, I'd like to stick to the acrylic painting part of it, maybe in a few months, once I really get a good flow schedule in place. My in-person paint parties are starting to grow again because COVID's starting to kind of lessen a bit. So I'm getting a couple of things. One, I'm getting a lot of inquiries for my in-person events, even though we're not quite there yet. I can foresee that in the very near future, my weekends are going to be likely filled up with those. I am getting lots of Zoom online private events for birthdays, et cetera, et cetera. So, but eventually I will have a really nice set schedule once I get a good flow, a better flow going, or more organization. That's what I'm trying to get at. I will possibly start doing oil painting because that is a really awesome, beautiful medium to work with. You can just really create some amazing stuff, but there's a lot more involved in oil painting. Maybe not a lot more. There's a few extra steps depending on what you want to do with it. And because of the drying time for oil painting, typically it takes a few days to produce something really intricate. So, all right, but let's see. So Naomi, yeah, great question. I have done some acrylic paints, portrait paints. I don't have any here in the studio. I haven't done a whole bunch of portraits in acrylic paint, but I have done, there's a really cool, and maybe I'll bring a video, I'll show a video of it one of these days. So somebody commissioned me to do a painting of, what's the singer's name? Oh gosh, I'm going to forget her name right now. Ariana Grande on a pair of Converse shoes. And I did her a different picture on each shoe. And I did it all in acrylic paint, little picture on each shoe. But they came out, first portraits I did, I think it wasn't Ariana Grande, it was somebody else, but I did 2 or 3 before that. Anyway, there are some similarities. It's just the technique to get to that kind of finish is a little different. But I personally like oil painting a little bit better. The finishes you get, the quality, the blend that you can get with a really good oil paint is just amazing. So, okay. But all right, everybody. I think we're pretty good here. I think we've covered almost everything, if not everything. Again, the basics. There's a lot more that these brushes can do, but we'd spend all day. I could sit here and probably, with one brush, create a whole. You can use one brush and create an entire painting with intricate detail. There's technique involved. Okay. And then a lot of the stuff requires patience, time, but make sure you all experiment with the process. That's the number one thing. For those of you that are really new and do not have brushes, don't know where to start, check out the description of the video. There are links there, like I said. You can go check those out. It takes you directly to Amazon where it'll talk about those. You could explore, get them from Amazon or from somewhere else if you'd like. No big deal, but it'll give you a good idea. I posted up some multimedia paper information, some brushes. I didn't put up any paint supply information. Maybe I'll do that later this afternoon, and I'll post it on my Facebook. But all right, everyone, that is the end of our session today. Quite a bit longer than I expected. But I do appreciate everyone being here with me today. I hope you all got something out of this. Please remember to send me your questions. We've got quite a few events coming in April. I just recently started to post. I'm going to be adding another event here pretty soon. The gnome that we did in person a couple of days ago. This little guy right here, this Happy Spring gnome, is coming up as a virtual tutorial. I'll be posting this later today. Details on this event. Probably not. We won't be doing this for about another 2.5, maybe 3 weeks. Gives you all a little time to get ready for it. Okay, but that and a lot more to come. But all right, everyone. Thank you so much. B Dibs, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. And again, folks, I just want everyone to know that this was not a comprehensive, complete, all-encompassing tutorial. There's a whole lot more, but this is the basics, okay? Video is going to be available immediately afterwards on Facebook and on YouTube. You can go back and watch it again. Or if you haven't watched it yet, plan on watching it later, you will be able to do so. Okay, so there is that. But all right, everyone, have a good night. Thank you so much. I will see you all very soon. Bye now. Good night.